So, you've just moved in, you've spent practically every penny you've got on the house itself, and when you come out into the garden, you're confronted with a typical dull grey little patio like this. But you can transform it with just a little bit of cash, a few good ideas, in practically no time at all. Don't believe me? Watch this space. Well, first for the patio itself. Obviously at this stage we can't afford to relay it, so I'm going to give these rather tired old slabs a bit of a facelift by stenciling a border right round the edge there. Oh yes. For maximum impact on the patio, obviously you want the biggest pots you can get, but big pots can be very expensive. These, though, are cheap. They're plastic. £4 the little ones, £5 the big ones. But we don't want them to look cheap. We want them to look $1 million, and so we're going to paint them with this exterior-grade water-based paint. Now, one thing you must do before you paint, you must undercoat with a special acrylic undercoat so that the paint is going to stay on and not chip off. What a bare expanse of wall like this is crying out for is a hanging basket full of colourful trailing plants, one either side so that they frame the patio doors. What I'm going to do now is plant it up. It obviously makes life easier if you work on a bucket or a big flower pot. Now to line the basket, I'm going to use this stuff. It's an artificial moss made out of coir fibre, and I prefer it to real moss because I think it's easier to use. If it does happen to dry out, it doesn't shrink like real moss does. The next stage is to put a piece of plastic in the bottom, which you can see I've just cut a few little slits in it so that it'll stop the basket drying out too fast. I'm using a lightweight compost here. This is a good one for hanging baskets because obviously when this is wet it's pretty heavy, but a soil-based one would weigh twice as much, and that's asking a lot of any bracket, however firmly fixed. I mean, even this will dry out, especially in very hot weather, so you need a scoop or two of water-retaining gel crystals. Now, for the plants we've chosen, we're going with our colour scheme of orange and green with just a little bit of white, and I think that will look really pretty. So we've got a ivy leaf geranium in the middle, and for our trailing plants I'm using variegated Nepeta. It really does produce the most wonderful long trails, 2 or 3 feet by the end of the summer, so that will look great on that wall. The secret of a good hanging basket is to absolutely stuff it with plants. It really is. You put in a few, it's never going to look spectacular, and obviously that's what we want here. Now obviously we've got a lot of plants growing in a small amount of compost, so they do have to be well fed, and these little plugs of slow release fertiliser are brilliant. You just put them in when you plant it and you don't have to worry about feeding it again the whole summer. Right, now the last thing is obviously a thorough soaking. Watering is the key to success with hanging baskets, but it makes sense to hang them up first while they're still just about carryable, and then water them when they're in position. The patio's painted, the baskets are up, and the containers are planted. It's already looking very good, but what it needs now is time. Well, it's had time, about 3 months, and these plants are really doing the job we hoped they'd do in brightening up this rather dull patio. It's a pity there's not a bit more sun today, because these beautiful bronzy orange gazanias would then be wide open, but that's the English summer for you. I think these have worked really well. This is the flame nettle, coleus, with these wonderful bronzy red leaves. You grow it for its foliage, and the way to make sure you get the best and most colourful foliage is to pinch out any flower buds as soon as they form, and that'll keep the plants nice and bushy and putting all their energies into producing more of these lovely velvety red leaves. Now, the budget for everything on this patio is under £100. We've spent about 65 on the hardware, the baskets, the brackets, the pots, the paint and so on. But of course that's money you won't have to spend again. And some of the plants will carry on. That lovely bronzy phormium with the grass in front of it. So next year, all you'll need to do is buy some more annuals, and I reckon you can recreate this for about £20.
When seasoned gardener Brian Harris moved to a flat in the heart of the city, he was determined to continue with his hobby, despite the obvious constraints. His success speaks for itself.
And what we tried to do when we first, 10 years ago when we first came here, was to build a structure of the plants so that we have evergreens that keep the protection going. And then we put in plants during the season that are of interest, some normal average plants, and some we try special plants like this one here, which we have a mixture of success with.
Yes.
But it makes it more interesting.
That's going to be very tender, isn't it?
Yes, well, it's very protected here, even in the winter. In fact, most of the plants seem to be quite happy. But wind is probably our biggest problem on the outside, but on the inside, we've got the warmth of the building, so we have advantages as well as disadvantages, and we try and play them off against each other.
So it's quite a little sort of warm microclimate when you can get out the wind.
Yes, yes. I mean, the difference between balcony gardening and ordinary gardening, I think, is that it's a very concentrated work, i.e. every plant has got to do a job, and if it's not working or it's a failure, you have to do something about it fairly quick because it shows up in to a much greater degree than it would in a normal garden.
Now, you're quite high up here. Have you ever had plants sort of literally blown off?
Yes,
or
I've
blown
had
out of
plants
pots?
that have simply fallen off, and in fact I had a horrific experience where this whole unit, which was not protected because it was, I thought, so heavy that it couldn't possibly move, actually fell over, which could have killed someone.
You seem to have a lot of shade-loving plants here.
Well, this is the north facing, so this never gets any sun at all. We've got variegated ivy, and those are probably the only colourful plants that you could put in there.
Yes. Well, I like the way the ivy's repeated. It's not only around the edge of the planters, but you've also got it in pots further up.
That's right. I don't like, pots as such, so I cover them with the ivy, basically, and then put the colour and the other plants into it. It just shows that just because you have a small space, it doesn't mean that you can't really participate in gardening. This is what I like about it.
Martika Lager's balcony garden is even smaller, but nevertheless still gives her plenty of scope to develop her gardening techniques.
You're really high up here, aren't you?
Yes.
What are the main problems about gardening on top of a building?
Well, I think they're pretty obvious. It's wind, sun. I face southwest here, so I have full sun. And erratic watering, because I water completely by hand. But actually, that said, I think the positives outweigh the negatives. I think it's a great place to learn about gardening.
Now, what surprises me is that you've got plants from very different environments, very close together. Like the ceanothus there, which is obviously liking being up in the baking sun. Yet just below it, we've got the hydrangeas.
There's shady corners in the garden, and you just have to maximize the use of those. That's what it's all about.
Now, I've noticed your planters are really full. There's really no room for weeds to grow.
Well, I don't like the look of bare dirt on the top of a planter. And a lot of these plants are so big that I can't put anything else in the planters to compete with the plant. So, for example, this rose is a very big plant. I can't put anything else in that pot to compete with it, so I put just low ground cover in the bottom. I've got some purple oxalis and some Veronica pendiculata, which I think works quite well and doesn't compete with the rose. I have a camellia over there with white flowering thyme under it and little white violets, and again, that doesn't compete with the camellia.
So you're using ground cover even on such a very small scale?
Yes, exactly.
Makes the most of your planting opportunities.
I've become very interested in foliage recently, and I've taken a liking to purple foliage, and I've started focusing on variegated foliage because I think it breaks up the greenness of this little balcony. It was all too much the same, and this breaks it up. So, for example, I have a variegated heuchera there and a variegated geranium. I like experimenting with combinations. For instance, that chive and the golden thyme is something I saw at the Chelsea Flower Show that I particularly like, so I've tried to copy it. An idea I had of my own was to combine this Iris japonica with the stipa grass, and I think it's very effective.
It's quite striking, isn't it?
It's just fun to experiment.
Now, what do you do with the plants that have died, or all the prunings and things?
You think I have room up here to compost as well?
They get thrown away.
I think I make the best of my space, but I don't have room for that.
So, you've had a new conservatory built and it looks great. You've laid a new patio which looks, well, bare, and it really draws your eye to the geometric arrangement of plumbing on the wall. What this is crying out for is a seating area under the kitchen window. Lots of plants in containers, climbers framing the window there. And the first thing we need is some trellis. We've stained the trellis this lovely soft duck egg blue colour. We've used the same stain on the baskets and given them a couple of coats of matte acrylic varnish just to make them weatherproof. I must say I'm very keen on baskets because you get so much container for your money. I mean, this basket cost under £10 and you couldn't even get plastic for that. Now, before you plant it up, a couple of things to do. First, put some old plastic flower pots in the bottom. You're bound to have a stack of them in the shed or in a cupboard somewhere. And these do two things. One is they fill up the space a bit, but they also stop the plastic liner from sitting on the bottom when it's wet and therefore make the basket less likely to rot. This is ideal. It's a garden rubbish bag, good and strong. You can trim off the excess later. And then the last job, a couple of drainage slits in the bottom. And now we're ready to plant. If you're on a very tight budget, this is a good way of saving money. I bought little plantlets of this plant. This is Isotoma or Laurentia, back in the spring by mail order. When they arrived, I potted them up and kept them on a sunny windowsill in a cool room, and now they're ready to go out. And I reckon they've cost me well under half of what they'd cost me if I'd bought them in the garden centre. Now, these three will very quickly grow together and form a cushion of lovely starry blue flowers. So I'm just tying the honeysuckle to the trellis to start it scrambling up and over the window, and we're almost there. But this is meant to be a seating area. Bargain of the week, a raffia sofa for under £15. We've given it a couple of coats of yacht varnish to make it weatherproof, so it will last a couple of years, and all you have to do now is sit here and watch your plants grow. I haven't actually been sitting here solidly for the last 3 months, but hasn't everything grown well? I'm really pleased with the colour scheme. I think the peach, the blue and the white has worked really well together. I love the patio rose Sweet Dream, and that arctotis, that lovely peachy coloured daisy, looks absolutely stunning. The whole thing's cost about £130. 50 for the bits and pieces, the trellis, the compost, the baskets and so on, and about £80 for the plants. Now that may seem quite a lot, but apart from a bit of bedding, it's all permanent planting. And when it gets too big for the baskets, you can plant it out in the garden.
One of the pleasures of walking through the town is that you can peer into everybody's front gardens. But of course the real secrets are at the back. Thomasina, this garden is tiny. I reckon we could almost stretch across it, the pair of us.
Let's try.
Almost, but not quite.
Really?
And it's not much longer either, is it? What are the actual dimensions?
15 by 20.
Good design begins at home, and designer Thomasina Tarling gained her experience in creating tiny green spaces right here outside her own back door. She's evolved some design rules for patio gardens.
I think one of the most important things is to get what are bones in a garden like this, which is evergreen bones, and you need variegated foliage to give something that's going to make it look nice all year round, which is vital.
Actually, the first thing I noticed when I walked into the garden was these two, I'm not quite sure what they are.
Cupressus glabra, standard Cupressus glabra. And mostly people's eyes seem to go to them. Then hopefully you wander about and then go up. And I think it's awfully important to have several different heights and levels.
So to get that height, you rely on climbers on a trellis.
Not too rampageous ones, if possible, ones that you can slightly control. But yes, certainly.
Next height down, standards.
Standards. And the shrubs that have grown up, I've allowed them to grow only so high, and I cut them if they get any higher.
Yes, it's interesting that although you've got a small garden, you haven't stuck to small plants.
No, because I don't think you should. I think small plants look rather mimsy and dull. I think you want things with a bit of life to them and size. And it's better to have big ones and control them than to have little miserable ones and keep trying to make them grow.
Right, so okay, so you've got some big shrubs for your next height. Then down a bit more, smaller shrubs, less permanent things perhaps, like this fuchsia.
Yes, exactly, which comes into its own in the summer, as you can see, and it lasts for a long time because the foliage looks just as pretty, even if it isn't flowering. It's only just beginning to flower, and it looks lovely, that sort of pinkish
It does look
mixture,
lovely.
doesn't it?
And then down one more layer.
Down one more layer to the pots, which are always as crammed as could possibly be, and again, the colours are chosen quite carefully.
So you mentioned colour. What are your colour rules?
So I think in a small garden you want fairly restricted colour range. You wouldn't want bright yellows or oranges or anything too violent. And colours that blend with the foliage. So this side is all sort of golden. It's meant to be, apart from my neighbour's pale pink rose. And it's white and golden and glaucous foliage and then mauve as well. And this side is meant to be all silver and green and silver and white.
Now foliage then, you actually do give more importance to than colour.
Yes, tremendously, because foliage is there all year round. And there's something very pleasing about looking out and seeing lots of different greens, or greeny blues and greeny yellows, that you can get. I love flowers dearly, but you can get slightly bored of too many flowers all staring you in the face. But you can't ever somehow get bored of foliage.
It's very nice glaucous blue here.
It is. I think Melianthus major, which I'm told is a wild and rather unpopular plant in Australia. I think it's absolutely marvellous.
Now you've mentioned cutting back. In a small garden like this, control must be one of the most important things.
Well, it is, because if I didn't control it, actually you and I wouldn't have room to stand. It really is absolutely vital. You've got to keep judiciously cutting back, I think would be the phrase, and staking things with all these hidden stakes. I have to stake them and pull them back with bits of wire against the wall to stop the whole thing flopping forward.
Now what about your little pond at the back here?
Yes, extremely fond of that.
Is it important to have water, do you feel, in a little garden?
I
Even
think
this
it's
size?
vital, yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of the fact that it's still, and if it's a little bit more open than this one, you get another reflection, another dimension. Then there's frogs. This has got frogs and newts and fish, and the birds come.
I like that seat in the corner there. It looks so shady and calm.
Well, it is rather snug. You have to fight your way into it a bit, but once you're there,
And is it possible to have a little garden like this and be a very, very busy person and not look after it the way you do?
Yes, yes, it is. What you can actually do is cut out some of the pots, for instance, concentrate on the foliage and the evergreen, and only grow things that don't need too much fuss and palaver. And you can do just exactly that.
This is certainly the biggest of our 3 patios, and while it's great to have all this space, what it also means is you've got a bare expanse of wall that goes on and on and on. So this is the problem, and this is the solution. We're going for a modern Japanese-style planting here, using mainly striking foliage plants like the bamboo and this stunning acer. But plants this big aren't cheap. Most of our budget's gone on those. So we've gone for cheap containers, plastic in good, strong shapes, and machine-made terracotta. And having given them a special acrylic undercoat, we've spray painted them, matte black and silver. Now the first job, having made some drainage holes in the bottom, of course, is to put in some polystyrene. This stops the compost washing into the drainage holes, and just as important, actually fills up the space so you don't have to use quite as much compost. That's about right. Okay. Next, I'm going to add some water-retaining gel crystals. That'll stop the compost drying out too quickly. And then we're ready to put the plant in. I think that looks lovely with the growth draping over the side like that. Okay, fill in with a bit more compost. Right. I'm going to put some of these lovely pebbles on the surface and then plant some mind your own business, because it has a lovely mossy look. It's a menace in the garden, but it's great in a container. And that will spread, grow over the stone, look really pretty. Well, it's getting there, isn't it? I think we'll put some pebbles on the ground around the pots, because again it's very Japanese and also helps to break up the rather dull texture of the slabs. And then everything needs jolly good water. In fact, even the pebbles look better when they've got a bit of water on. Look at that, magic. Well, I think it's almost there. But maybe there's just one last touch we need. And this is it. This lovely, chunky, split bamboo screen really does add to the Japanese effect, and it cost just £12.50. In fact, the whole budget for this arrangement was about £150, 90 of which we spent on the plants. And don't they look good? And this bamboo's got lots of new growth on it. That'll stay during the winter, and so will the hebe. This lovely ferny acer will lose its leaves, but it's such a strong architectural shape that the bare stems will look very good. And this grass, this lovely Molinia Caerulea variegata, that does die down, but the leaves, the stems, the flower heads all turn the most wonderful, warm, biscuity beige, and when they're rimed with frost, they look absolutely magical.
The mood is set the moment you scrunch up the gravel drive, past this line of yuccas, stripped of their lower leaves to resemble palm trees. The cypresses behind create the soaring verticals characteristic of the Italian landscape, and the eruptions of flower are from plants associated with Mediterranean villa gardens, like this albizia tree, scented of ripe apricots, and the trumpet vine, Campsis Madame Gallant. These feats are pulled off by making full use of the warmth of the walls and the shelter of the trees, which allow plants to grow that wouldn't be hardy in the open. But there's something else fueling the Riviera atmosphere: pots. For the garden's creators, Nick and Pam Coote, the inspiration sprang from several sources.
Well, it was recollections of 10 happy years in Italy, so it evoked the Italian atmosphere for me. And practically, we've got a dry, sandy soil here, so the plants we looked up in Hilliers as suitable for sandy soil turned out to be many of them Mediterranean in origin.
Well, pots are a major part of the display, aren't they? And I suppose they must allow you to extend the range of exotic plants you can grow.
Oh, yes, I mean, that's quite true, because the acacia wouldn't live out of doors in this country, and again, this Justitia, or this Russellia equisetiforma, which is a marvellous plant, which you'd have to have indoors, but with pots you can move them outside and be very flexible.
And, of course, these fiery colours aren't very common among hardy plants, are they?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the sort of fire and stored-up sunlight of the Mediterranean just exploding in England and making our cold climate seem warm.
But they look great just stood around in groups, don't they, the pots?
Yes, I think it's
Especially
very
on hard.
important to group pots and put things together and arrange colours. But I do think there's one quite important thing about pots in groups, and that is to give them a sort of framework, by which I mean good foliage plants behind, like that Mahonia there, for instance, quite dramatic, spiky foliage, or the blue of euphorbias, that always sets off colours well, or something variegated. It's like a picture having a frame on it. It just lifts it into another stratosphere.
Now, all the plants we've seen so far like a bit of sun, don't they? What do you do in the shade?
Yes, well, in the shade, I think you've actually got a surprisingly wide choice. Hostas are a very good bet. And then there are fuchsias, which actually like to flower in the shade. And most spectacular are all busy lizzies. I mean, they make really quite a show in really quite deep shade.
You've got them at the other end of the garden, haven't you, with blue junipers?
Yes, that's right. They do very well there. But, of course, there are other more exotic things. There's some very interesting asparaguses, and clivia, which has wonderful shiny strap-leaf leaves and flowers in the winter, which is marvellous. But I suppose the most exotic thing of all is the banana. And there it is, Japanese banana.
Of course, plants in the shade need a lot less water than plants in the sun, and
Very true.
watering must be one of your great burdens. How on earth do you cope?
Well, actually, it's not as bad as it seems, because when you're watering pots, you're getting water in exactly the right places, as opposed to scattered all over the bed. Secondly, there are some tricks I think one can play. One can feed up the plant early in the season and give it the strength and robustness to resist drought. You can put saucers under some plants.
The fleshy-leaf plants wouldn't like that
No,
much.
you certainly wouldn't like that. And then also you can put mulch on the surface of the plant, particularly of stones. If you were to turn up a stone, it's always damp underneath. Well, much the same applies to a stone mulch.